appoint Carlos via motion as a vice chair for this meeting.
I second it. It's fine.
I second that.
Excellent. And over to you, Carlos.
Me
So we
too.
just have to adopt the minutes first and then the agenda. Or I
Yes.
guess agenda first, then the minutes.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I acknowledge that we're holding this meeting on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. First order of business is to adopt the minutes from last meeting. Do I have first? Brett, rather. Second. Roger. Okay,
Sure.
great. All in favor? Wonderful. Minutes from last meeting were adopted. And can we have adoption of today's agenda? Kareem? Is that?
Yep.
Yep, perfect. Seconder,
Here.
Brent, awesome. All right, all in favor?
Here.
Okay, great. That's adopted. So moving on to business arising, and I'll leave it to Jesse Fletcher, planner with the District of Squamish.
Thank you. So good afternoon, Advisory Design Panel. My name is Jesse Fletcher, planner with the district, and I'd like to introduce development permit number 545, located at 39455 Discovery Way. DP 545 proposes 2 additional light industrial buildings to the Sea to Sky Business Park. This project was previously presented to Advisory Design Panel in August of last year, and ADP gave the project a C and asked it to return. So as a reminder, DP 545 is zoned I8 and is reviewed against the universal guidelines of DPA 3. At our previous meeting, ADP identified a number of recommended changes. Staff have attempted to highlight the applicant modifications in the table in your report. So apologies in advance if I've missed something. Staff are seeking ADP feedback on the applicant's revised site, architectural, lighting, and landscape plans. The applicant has made several changes that bring the application more in alignment with the DPA guidelines. So 2 additional comments. Since the project was previously reviewed, there have been 2 relevant bylaw changes in the district. The first is the adoption of an amendment bylaw to the Land Development Procedures bylaw. The change here means that this project is eligible for delegated approval by the Director of Community Planning if the project meets all of the DPA guidelines and has no variances. The second is that there were a suite of changes to the zoning bylaw, including an update to the I8 zone. These changes include increased commercial uses in this area. None of the changes identified have significant implications on the project at this stage, as we don't know who the end users are. I will hand it over to the applicants now to present. So Joe, if you want to introduce the project.
Sure. Can somebody give me permission? Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Trigos from DNA. I don't have the ability to share my screen right now.
Tori, if we can just hand the presenter ball back to Joe, please.
Do I need to do something on my end, Jesse?
No, we need the host to make, oh, there you go. You've got it now.
Okay. So can you see the title of my screen right now?
Yep.
Okay. So hi everybody, I'm Joe Trigos again. So we're going to be discussing about all the improvements we did from last presentation to what we've came up with in this stage. So on August 20th last year, we came here for ADP. This is more or less the image of two buildings, light industrial buildings that we presented. In general, the IDP supported the project, but you guys asked for some recommendations to be resolved, and then that's why we're here. The main recommendations were basically color and modulation of the buildings, in general, improvement of pedestrian maneuverability and accessibility throughout the site, provision of continuous cover over pedestrian walkways. We'll talk about a little bit of green options as sustainability, the increase of landscaping, how we are integrating Squamish elements, and the provision of rock wall details along Pioneer Way on the north side of the site. This is a general overview of what we are proposing right now. Personally, I think we've improved a lot. We'll talk you through these different elements. So, speaking first about color and modulation of the buildings in terms of color. Initially, we presented both buildings with the same gray color scheme, just trying to highlight a little bit of just the use of concrete and steel. So at this stage, we are stepping away from that scheme, and we are introducing more vibrant and engaging colors for the proposed development. So we are using two dark blue and light color schemes that is going to be alternated between tall panels and high panels. We are using different element materials depending on the panel's height. We're using one material to highlight tall panels and a different materials to highlight low panels. As you know, this site has two buildings. One building is going to be looking like that, and we're going to be alternating that scheme in the other building. What that means is for building 2, the high panels will be using the light blue color, and the tall panels will be the opposite. In terms of modulation, initially both buildings had 3 segments. This is building 1. And they look pretty similar. Just to clarify, building 2 on the previous proposal was just a single roof line. So in this proposal, we're breaking. Somebody has a question? No? Okay. So in this proposal, we're breaking up the building into multiple segments by the use of different materials and panel height changes. Depending on whether the panel is tall or low, we're using different color schemes and finishes and accents in order to break the building into both buildings into 5 segments. We're using different color schemes depending on, as I said, depending on whether we have high panels and top panels to break the whole elevation. Building 2 has an inverted color scheme, as I discussed before, creates diversity within the same site. But as we wanted to feel both buildings as part of the whole, just one family during the whole development. We are modulation by varying materials. Material schemes and accents are alternating along different sections of the buildings. For example, we're using in the tall panels, we are using a covered trellis with vegetated columns that wrap around all the corners of the building, and we have metal accents on those high panels. Then the covered trellis transitions into a steel frame canopy as we move along, and then we come back again on the middle of the building, of each building, on the 3 front elevations, to again a wood trellis, and then that switches again to a metal canopy. So this alternating pattern repeats every 2 and 4 units, depending on the. So this makes the pedestrian travel more engaging throughout walking throughout the buildings. Talking about the roof lines, as I mentioned, we only have initially just one break at the building in building 1. Building 2 has only one break before, and currently we are breaking more the height of the roof line of the buildings. Tall panels in both sides of the building and at the middle of the building. Low panels have wood accent screens that pop out the roof line, making it a little bit more interesting. And at the middle tall panels, we have these accent screens that still pops out a little bit more to give more that helps more that feel of that transition throughout the image of the building. We try to emphasize a little bit more the individuality of each unit. So before, all the units have the same appearance, and we had only one kind of signage in per unit. So we try to incorporate some architectural features and signage to emphasize this. The tall panels we are using, for the tall panels, the entry door is located adjacent to metal panels below those wood trellises. For the low panels, the vertical wood screens stop right above the main entrance of each unit. And then we introduce also projecting signage, fabric signage that makes it easier for all the businesses to be shown through the sign. Well, that's about color and modulation of the buildings. We're going to be talking about more pedestrian maneuverability and accessibility throughout the site. Before we've only provided 5 feet, 1.5 meter sidewalk. So we increased the size of the width of the sidewalks to 2 meters. Again, in terms of pedestrian crosswalks, previously we only showed it. It was a painted crosswalk, and it was only shown the 5 feet width. So our approach right now was to improve the safety of pedestrian movement when walking from building to building. So what we did is, again, we increased the width of those, and on the west side of buildings, we continued the sidewalk in concrete to make it more visible for drivers, and so you'll notice the change of materials in the pavement. Previous scheme was the pedestrians on the Discovery Way side had to either climb a flights of stairs or wrap around those both sidewalks, slope sidewalk. And what we did is we improved the accessibility down from Discovery Way. So we included an accessible pathway east of Building 2 to ease the effort needed to climb the slope at the corners of the buildings. Talking about this, we provided previously this amenity space or usable open space, some picnic tables, but they were not accessible. So we did include right now picnic tables that will be accessible in wheelchair accessible in terms of space and height. Next point here will be a provision of covered canopy throughout the pedestrian walkways. So initially we only proposed a steel frame canopy above entry units and above the overhead doors. So in this iteration, we expanded all the covered walkways to cover not only the entry, but the whole walkway throughout the main elevations of both buildings. So as previously mentioned, a wooden covered trellis with vegetated columns wraps around both buildings. When the wooden trellis stops, it transitions to a steel frame canopy for the low panels. So that helps in diversify the experience when you're walking throughout the elevation of the. Talking about green options and sustainability. This is our previous site plan where we only provided small pockets of landscape islands and very small areas with permeable paving. So what we did is we increased the amount of permeable paving, mainly on the north side of building wall, building one, which all parking stalls there have permeable paving. And we did use a combination of landscape islands and permeable paving north of building 2, and we included also full landscape islands south of building 2. So as mentioned earlier, our initial approach was to just express a simple building with the use of only concrete and steel. So in this iteration, we are incorporating the use of more wood. One will be the wooden covered trellis on both sides of the building, and we added also screen accents for the low panels. We also included this vegetated wrap around those columns, which I think it looks very, very interesting. It's important to mention that these wooden trellis are located at both buildings on both sides and in the middle of each elevation. This is more or less what we're planning to do. So this gives you kind of an idea of what we improved. In the right hand, you can see, well, the permeable paving, the landscape islands. And I don't know if you can notice, but the wood, the blue hatch here indicates where those wooden trellis are with the vegetated columns. Some sustainability items that we also considered. So the tall panels units have an additional set of awnings over mezzanine windows that will help to provide a bit more shading because those panels they do have bigger windows. All units have an overhead door that can open to provide natural ventilation, and we are including provisions for solar panel installation for in case future for the potential use of future tenants. The building has an EPDM roofing ballasting system, which is considered a cool roof. I'll hand it a little bit to David right now to talk about this rock wall details. David?
Yeah, I just wanted to say a bit about the boulder walls. We're going to have a considerable amount of boulders from the site excavation, which we're planning to reuse in this two-tiered arrangement on Pioneer Way and on Discovery Way as well. On Pioneer Way, we will have a two-tiered system, and the upper tier is actually 2 feet or less high. For the majority of the length of the wall along Pioneer Way, the lower wall is approximately 3 feet high, and we've got a 5-foot landscape strip in between, which is heavily planted. We've got a bit of planting at the foot of the wall, adjoining the multi-use pathway. And at the top, we have the landscape islands between the parallel parking spaces, and there's also landscaping continuing alongside the parallel parking spaces as well. We've added quite a lot more coniferous trees on the on Pioneer Way, which weren't in the previous scheme as well. And generally, with the landscaping, we've accommodated all the non-bear attractant species, as well as reducing the numbers of potential fire risk shrubs that we had included previously. So there have been a few changes, and obviously a substantial increase in the amount of planting with the additional islands between the parking spaces. So that's, in summary, what we've done with the landscape. I'm happy to take any questions on
Okay, thanks, David. So there were additional ADP comments that we got last time. One of those were that the site plan seems packed in. Currently, zoning by law allows us for 75% of site coverage, and our two buildings are using almost 40% of the allowable site. So the other one is meeting parking requirements of the bylaw. It's important. So we've provided a total of 125 parking spaces. What was required by the zoning bylaw was only 82 parking spaces. So we've provided an extra 43 parking spaces for, considering the potential future mezzanines and different uses of the future tenants. Again, considering those future uses in mind, that's why we are considering those 43 additional parking spaces. It's important to mention that the end units, we are providing also overhead doors so that they can connect to the adjacent common open spaces for both sides of the buildings. Sorry, for both buildings on the east side of each building. You guys also mentioned the needs of accessibility points for pedestrians from taking transit. So the phase 1 of Pioneer Way extension project is in progress right now by the district. So those works include one bus stop at the northeast corner of our lot. There's another one located on the south side of the lot, half a block away along Commercial Way. And there's another one right next phase 1 along Queensway. Well, I think that's it for us right now.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Are you chairing the meeting, Carlos?
I'm happy to throw it back to you, John.
Okay, I thank you very much. Sorry about the delay there with my glitchy computer here. Can I just confirm attendees very quickly so that I'm on the same page with everyone? I'm only seeing 6 names on the list on the side: Brent, Carlos, Farzan, Julian, Karim, and Catherine. Have I missed anyone?
Me,
David?
David.
Are you a new panel member?
No, I'm with the presenters.
Okay, yes.
I'm the landscape architect.
I was meaning the ADP panel members. I don't see Sarah. She's not here today. Okay, so it's those 6. So at this point, we would, I'll just remind that we're going to try and close out this by 3 p.m. We are on a time frame today. So we'll do a round of questions. Only 6 of us, so hopefully it'll go quickly. Can we start with Brent?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate the presentation and the work that's gone into improving the design and sort of updating and working to address our comments from the previous ADP. I had a question that came up wondering about pedestrian access to and from Pioneer Way. So recognizing that is where the majority, maybe the marquee commercial frontage locations are, and there's no access provided. Just wondering if that was something that was explored.
Initially, can you hear me, Brent?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So initially, we did explore that option. What we came to a conclusion that all access should come off from Pioneer Way. So sorry from. Hold on a second. I want to show you the site plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we did explore that option. There's a ditch down there that I think it is going to be covered. So by exploring that option, we thought the best location for entries the site and exiting the site will be along Discovery Way.
Okay. So then I guess next question would be for that internal pedestrian walkway, the crossing at the west end of the main entrance point off of Discovery Way, where you've shown the design changing from a painted crossing to concrete. Just wondering if a raised crossing was explored through there, sort of noting that there's likely going to be many vehicles looking to access the spaces on Pioneer Way, and that'll be a sort of heavily used access point for vehicles.
So are you referring the crosswalk between Building 1 and Building 2 on the west side of the?
Yeah.
Yes, we did explore that option to raise that, but one important thing to note here is that all units in both buildings, they do have loading in the front. So that means we're not providing like a raised sidewalk there. So we're only changing the material of the pathway to concrete. That's the main reason we didn't raise that crosswalk there.
Okay, so no, but the walkways around the building are raised. They're at like 150 millimeter.
No,
okay.
Just north of Building 1.
Just north of Building 1. Everything else
that's the only one where we have a raised actually sidewalk, right? The north and south of Building 2, we are providing that walkway just in change of material because we do have loading area there.
Okay. That is it for questions for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Brent.
Thanks, Brent. We'll go to Carlos next.
Yeah, thanks very much for the presentation. I've got a quick question for Jesse, actually. I was wondering if you could just clarify the new kind of powers in the delegated permit. So will future permits like this have to come to advisory design panel? Is that still part of the process if it's delegated?
Yeah, my understanding is that it's still part of the process, and if I'm incorrect, I'd ask Fiona to jump in here. So we still need to come to panel, but in order to qualify for delegated approval by the director, you would need to meet all of the guidelines.
That's correct. So only the approval process has changed, but we're still going to be bringing any projects that are of any significance for ADP review.
Awesome. Well, I'm all for that. I think that's great for moving things through. So that's wonderful news. Thank you for answering that question. I guess, Joe, my only question for you is, given when you're going to be applying for building permit for this building, what, if any, are the step code implications of this type of construction and making these buildings align with the step code requirement that you'll be held to?
As far as I understand, currently step code doesn't apply for base building industrial occupancies. That's my understanding. So we're going to be following for building permit process the National Energy Code, which its prescriptive requirements do follow if you comply with those requirements, you are going to be providing a little bit more than step 2 requirements, right?
Great. Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thanks, Carlos. Can we go with Farzan next, please?
Hi, thank you very much, Joe and David. I'll be very quick. First question, Joe. You mentioned it's not, are you going to meet ASHRAE? Is that what you're saying with regards to code compliance?
No, we are meeting the National Energy Code.
I see.
We're going to follow that path. Yeah.
Okay. And other question, did you mention the trellises are wood?
It's wood frame trellis covered with a metal panel with this mesh surrounded with ivy climbing plants.
Right, and I'm sure you need to check the horizontal combustible materials that are connected to the building. I don't know, and maintenance is another issue. Do you have any consideration, concern about the maintenance of wood in this weather and how it's going to be maintained?
Well, we for example, for phase one, we did provide a similar wood frame canopy just front of building one in the southwest corner of this master plan. We maintenance wise, what normally wood elements are treated with. So I don't see any concerns about maintenance for this type of wood.
Including with the wrapping of the vegetation,
That's correct.
I see. The question is maybe from David. David, if I may ask you, how is this ivy is going to grow on these trees? If there is no plant or anything underneath, how are they going to grow? David, do you hear me?
Maybe he's muted, but
I cannot hear him. Maybe I can.
I
Here. Yes.
There we
David.
go.
Hi, how are you, David?
I'm good, thanks. What we're looking at, it'll all be detailed, of course, in the building permit submission. But what we're thinking in terms of is some sort of a tree grate arrangement around the base of the columns, which are in the hard surfaced areas. So in effect, the tree grate would sit around the top of the concrete foundation, flush with the paving.
Right.
And then we'd have sufficient soil within that area below it to make these things viable.
So I mean, if you tell me that yes, it's going to be some soil around it, and it's not only rendering, it's going to actually be some trees, and it's going to last for a while, that's fine, David. If you just know that how it works and it's not just painting, that's fine. It works, you think?
Yeah.
it totally works. Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of those columns are actually already in soft landscaped areas, so they'll be fine. It's just the ones in the paved areas that we
I see.
have that sort of treatment for.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's for me, John. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Farzan.
Thank you, Farzan. Julian, are you ready?
Yep, sure. Thanks, David and Joe. So it's my first time seeing this, so I've got a couple of questions. I keep hearing the term ivy thrown around for these columns. What's on those columns, David? Please don't tell me it's ivy.
It's not ivy. Well, it could be Boston ivy. That's what we're thinking. So,
Okay.
Not English ivy, of course. So.
Great. Okay, great. On your section, David, you've got you show 450 mil of growing medium. What have you got growing in that?
In whereabouts are you talking about? On this?
Yeah, the section you showed, I saw a little tag that said 450 mil of growing medium.
Right. Did
I just make that up? I can't. Oh no, there we go. Yeah, I can see it. 450 mil growing medium. What's in that?
There we go. That looks like the arrow should be pointing to the shrubs, not the wall.
Okay.
So that's the shrub planting, and obviously the trees will be in a substantial area of growing medium.
It still doesn't seem that much for, excuse me, for shrubs, if you don't mind me saying. But it obviously depends what you've got in it, though.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is low to medium height material. So we feel, I mean, 450 is really what's generally being used as a standard for shrub planting. But yeah, if there are larger items, we'll obviously increase it.
Okay. What else did I have? Permeable paving. So I'm not sure if this is Joe or if this is you, David. Has there been a stormwater? Is there a stormwater management plan, or is what's happening with this stormwater when it goes through the paving? Is it going into rain gardens, or is it going into a tank, or what's happening?
Yes. Thanks for the question. Yes, the water is going to be leading to a detention tank, which is going to be located between buildings 1 and 2.
Okay, cool. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. Kareem is next.
Yes, hi. Thanks for the presentation and for the effort. But I like Julian, this is the first time I see this. But I can see from your images that you've done some work on it. I had a question regarding the sort of the roof line. If you go back to the perspective that you had, sort of a side angle. I'm just wondering if, yeah, like right there, for example, is it just the paneling on the facade that's just raised, or are the roofs also being changed?
So two things are coming on here. Maybe in the elevate this perspective it's not shown correctly, but the actual 1, 2, 3, 4 units in the middle of the buildings, they do have a taller roof. So there's a difference in the roof line there. So those 4 units, they do have a higher roof, a clear height inside. And then on both sides, we did also to allow, if need be, those if the tenant inside wants a higher ceiling, we can provide that there.
Okay. I was wondering if you gave any thought to maybe, when you're looking from this angle, for example, the first 2, and then you skip the 4 light green, and then you go to the next group. If you added some parapet on the perpendicular to give it some sort of volume, as opposed to just a flat screen that looks like it's just that it make it 3D more than 2D, if that makes any sense.
I totally get what you're saying. Yes, actually, for example, in the middle 4 units, we do have a concrete tilt panel going all the way up. So this, do you see my mouse here?
Yeah.
So yes, there's a line coming here because we do have a panel going perpendicular.
Got it.
That would create the volume that you are actually saying. But yeah, maybe this is something we missed in the perspective.
Yeah. Yes, I think that would help a lot.
Yes.
in highlighting the work you've already done to break up the masses and so on. The other question I had, and it was already asked, and I just want to reiterate it, is if there's going to be a sort of a comprehensive landscape maintenance. I'd hate for these sort of green clad posts to be neglected, and then they just look like this mesh wire that is all full of dead vines or dead sort of planting going up. But I'm sure the team your team will look into that.
For sure, we will.
That's it. That's it from
I
me.
totally get you. I understand you, and of course, we don't want to see only the meshes there, right? So there should be a maintenance plan in place to have those always looking nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kareem. Catherine, are you with us?
You're on mute, Kathleen.
Oh, there we go. I'm unmuted. Hi,
Yep.
can you hear me?
Sure.
Thanks. This too, this is the first time I'm seeing this as well. So lots of my questions got answered. In terms of the vines growing on the posts, what's the plan for irrigation for those?
My expectation would be that we would be providing some drip line perhaps to go into the growing medium of those posts, probably just running along the front of the building under the paving.
Okay, great. Yeah, because I too, and I'm thinking that if they don't get irrigated, they will probably
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
die for sure. And then the only other question I had was with respect to the permeable paving, that's in the, sorry, I'm just trying to find it on my screen here. It looks like you're just having sections that are, thank you, sections with pavers. And my question is, and maybe this is a larger question because I'm newer to this process, which is, is there any consideration to use another product to create permeable pavement as opposed to whatever is going to go down, whether it's asphalt? There's new products out there that are permeable because we have a lot of concrete in Squamish, especially in the industrial park.
Yeah, are you talking specifically on the permeable paving that we're proposing, or in general?
Well, in general, yeah.
We're well, this is industrial occupancy for sure. We can look for sure into more sustainable or permeable materials, but I do anticipate we're going to be using asphalt because of the nature of the you know, occupancy of both buildings. But for sure we can look into that for sure.
So in terms of the permeable paving that's in there right now, are you using pavers? Is that what that is?
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, because I was just looking it up. Unfortunately, my brain isn't what it used to be, because I'm a landscaper and there are other permeable products that you can use that can create a fully permeable surface.
Okay.
So I don't have it in front of me right now. But yeah, and maybe some of the folks who work for the district can speak to that as well.
For sure, we will consider those for sure.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have.
Thank you, Catherine. Jonas, did you want to address Catherine's question, or is that something we can speak to another time?
John, it's hard to hear you.
Okay, Catherine, we'll come back to that another time. It's a bigger question, I believe.
John, are you able to speak up at all? It's really, really hard to hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Slightly, yeah.
Still pretty quiet, John.
I don't know how to turn it up. It's already up. Okay, so we'll move on. We'll do a round of comments now, and I'll start with, unless anyone has any questions. Nope, then we'll start with comments from Brent.
Right on. Thank you, John. Yeah, thanks, guys. I think that largely the massing and the color variation is significantly improved from the last time you brought this to us. So I want to say thank you for the work put into that. Going back to my questions, I have some concerns with the pedestrian walkway being at road grade throughout the site, and I think that that's something that should be explored further. I think that as the district is looking towards having more people use alternative modes of transportation, transit, walking, biking, ensuring that people are safe throughout a industrial, but potentially with the new uses that are allowed and potentially going to be in this site, I think it's important that there's a great separation along that walkway, as well as a raised crossing or some sort of improved crossing from building 1 to building 2. And my only other comment is I think that exploring access for people walking and biking to Pioneer Way would be a really big benefit for the building. And I think that with the most visible frontages being along Pioneer Way, that there's really an opportunity there. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Brent. Carlos is next for comments.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'll just say I support all these changes and thank you very much for taking our comments under consideration and coming back with what I think will ultimately be a much better product.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. And Farzan?
Thank you, John. I think the project has improved greatly, and I will follow David to make sure these wrapped vegetated columns are not going to be dead after a few years. So David, I'm after you anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Farzan. And the next is Julian.
Thanks, John. So a couple of comments from me. David, I really advise you to choose those vines very carefully. Don't choose self-clinging vines. Boston ivy is self-clinging. You'll end up with it in bits of the building that you don't want it in, and it'll be a maintenance nightmare for years to come. So I would choose a winding vine, not a self-clinging vine. I would like to see a detail for the vegetated columns. I'm echoing Farzan's concerns here, and I want to make sure that these things actually work. So they need enough planting depth and make sure they're irrigated, etc. I'm kind of the opposite on the pedestrian experience. I like that you've no curbs here, or very few curbs. However, saying that, I would like to see more consideration given for things like rumble strips at the entry to alert drivers that they're entering into a predominantly pedestrian-dominated space. But overall, I think it's a great project. You've got some really good stuff going on. And I think the improvements that you've made have obviously been all done in the right direction. So yeah, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. And Kareem?
Thanks again. I reiterate my colleagues. I think a lot of work has been done, and in terms of color and material variation. My recommendation is for the architect to spend more time on maybe finessing or sort of fine tuning and just detailing the roof lines a little bit, just enhancing the breaks in the elevations and accentuating them. I think it's not going to be an extra a huge added cost to the project, but it will certainly look much better from different angles as you're experiencing this building in 3D in space. That's it from me.
Thank you, Kareem. And Catherine. Catherine, you're still on mute.
Sorry. Mostly what I want to echo is the choice of Boston ivy for the trellises. I think that's again not a great idea. I would choose a vine that was some kind of flowering vine that isn't going to take over, and also that they're watered and cared for, especially with the wind. They can dry out really quickly in those small areas. Yeah, and it's the first time seeing the project, but I can see some improvements. So that's it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any comments really. I echo what everyone else has said. I think it's actually some nice improvements from what we saw last time. So I thank the applicants for that. We'll go into the recommendation, and I'll just throw the question out to the panel. Do we feel that there are some recommendations that we should include for item B, or should we just go straight for item A and hear it as presented?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear anything.
And John, your mic kind of it's really hard to understand what's going on.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to improve that. I've got.
Oh, that sounds better. Whatever you just did is better.
Okay.
That's good.
John,
Yeah.
I think when you move up closer to the screen, the sound picks up a little better.
I got it. Okay. I would suggest that recommendation B, and that basically we support the project, but we have a couple recommendations. One of those is attention to the ivy or the vines, which we've heard a lot of. Are there any other recommendations that of particular that you would like to see addressed? No. So we will. What I need to do actually is our typical reading through of the recommendations very quickly, and then we'll have someone move for which recommendation we're going to pick, and then we'll vote. Recommendation A is that the advisory design panel supports the project as presented, does not need to see the project returned for further review. Recommendation B is that the advisory design panel supports the project as presented and will like the applicant to work with staff to resolve certain recommendations. C is that the advisory design panel supports the project as presented and would like the applicant to resolve the recommendations and return. And D is that the advisory design panel does not support the project as presented for the following reasons. So can I have someone move for option B?
I'll move option B.
Okay,
Second.
Carlos, and seconded by Kareem.
Yep.
Okay, and the vote is anyone against? No one against,
Nope.
so we're passing recommendation B. And any other comments from anyone before we finish with this applicant? There we go. Okay, so we're scheduled for a 15-minute break, a recess. I imagine that's so that the new team can come in, the next applicant. So we will go offline for about 10 minutes and then come back and rally for 15 here.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Business arising here is item 2 is DP 547-39541 Queensway, and we'll pass over to Asia, our planner.
Thanks, John. You're still very quiet from my end too, so I don't know if you can project your voice very loudly. It's appreciated. And could I just kindly ask while the architect is presenting if everybody could keep their mics muted, and then it'll be as clear sound as possible. So yeah, this is the second look at development permit 547, and it's for a mixed commercial, light industrial, and residential development at 39541 Queensway. The development needs to be reviewed under DPA 3, the Universal Development Guidelines, and these are outlined in the staff report under Appendix A. And in that report, I've highlighted the guidelines that are currently not necessarily being met by the development proposal. The project was considered by ADP in November, and since that time, the applicant has made several revisions to their design, and I won't go into the details. In the staff report, I've outlined ADP's previous comments and the applicant's response to those main comments. And so I just direct ADP's attention to that staff report. And without further ado, I will pass it on to the applicant, Brent Murdoch, to do a presentation. Brent, we're at 3:17 now, and I appreciate if you can have everything wrapped up before 3:30, and we'll try to keep it at the 10 minutes so we have plenty of room for discussion. Thanks. And you're muted.
And there we go. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Good to see everybody again. I will be brief and try and really highlight the aspects that we really worked on with staff. And if you recall, last time we really hadn't had a lot of input from staff with regards to other departments, a little bit of feedback from engineering. Since that time, we've had, I think, a full complement of commentary, and been busy working away on that. There were a number of key elements that design panel had touched on. I'm going to bring on a series of summary sheets here that hopefully sort of make it easy for you to review. And I hope that's working for everybody, so that we'll go through key aspects. But so if I point to the top right corner there, summary of site plan revisions, these were aspects that were brought up. The old site plan that was presented in November is on the top left, and then the new plan on the bottom here. But the big one tended to be a lot of concern with the multiple access points to the site, and some being a little bit more volatile and having conflicts and whatnot. And with staff's input and looking at a number of other aspects, including the potential for a roundabout at Queensway and Pioneer, which is not a fully prescribed at this point, but still being investigated. We felt that item number one was the removal of driveway access points off of the main part of Queensway and at the full north end of the site. The north end of the site will remain a fire truck access point, and in the dark green, you'll see what's referred to as, we'll call it a grasscrete, but I think we spec the actual product that were used in that condition, so that in emergency situations, that would be open to fire truck and emergency personnel. Queensway, a lot more discussion about exactly what that frontage should be, and point two being the movement of that to be a multi-access trail, and bringing community access, vehicular, rollerblades, bikers, what have you, along that side. So taking up a fairly significant part of the right of way, and determining exactly the profile of the road and ditch and all the way to the property line in that regard. Item three was, I forget, was one particular panel member was pointed out there's a fairly significant amount of call it amenity space and amenity features at the north end of the site. So a little bit of and at the same time some concern over abundance of parking in lieu of what might be better served as amenity space. And so overall, there's been a reduction of parking, hard surface area in and allowing for some additional parking that wraps around the north end of the building, and additional hardscape play area to the south of the building, being more, taking advantage of views, better sunlight, etc. And kind of a little bit of readjustment and robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, of where the distribution of quality outdoor spaces was to be held. A little bit of minor points with regard to landscape, in terms of adjustment of plant products and pollinator species. And there was some detailed calculations with regard to landscape estimate and open space calculation. Solar shading and view analysis has been added, and one of the other aspects is just a little bit more detail with regard to site furnishing, lighting, and signage. Moving on to elevations, although there were a fair bit of commentary from the staff level, is really looking at kind of a little bit variation in the building in terms of texture and detail and refinement of kind of a palette that probably had a good basis, but not particularly detailed to reflect a little bit more personality, and so getting down to a finer grain of review. We've got some other drawings which I think illustrate that a little better, but a little bit more color and variation in the building. I think the basic massing and intent is still remains fundamentally the same, but at the personal scale, it overall just seems to be a little bit more refined, although the elevations are not the best drawings. We've got some other ones we can show you in a little bit here. Getting into material palette, this drawing begins to illustrate a little bit more the scale and color, a little bit more detail with regard to building lighting, canopies, things that all add a lot more texture to the overall building form, and and certainly a lot more personality down at the pedestrian level. Just some of the getting into some of the materiality a little bit better, more real textural aspects of the materials being used, some of the signage and the aspects that we feel kind of start to complement the building. And so there's a real thematic aspect with regard to the signage, both directory signage and just wayfinding, and that's distributed and indicated on the site plan. Signage with regard to building texture, canopy detail, obviously a bit of a design vignette there, a small bit of a variation, also a bit of crafting and detail. This is a slight industrial, so it does have a little bit of that flavor, and certainly using hardy, durable materials that make sense. I won't go into too much detail on this, but a little bit of lighting and signage and furniture specification with regard to playground, exterior lighting, some of the site lighting in terms along the west property line, and making that a pedestrian friendly and comfortable as people begin to live here, even just going out for a dog walk and things of that sort, allowing for a little bit more comfortable level of personal space and not feeling too thrown off there. We don't have a ton of time, but really getting into just jump right into these 3D drawings, which I think start to give a little bit more refinement of the kind of texture on the building. Some of it having to do just straightforward with screening. This is a step code 4 building, and providing a little bit of screening, additional screening up and around the units, particularly on the west side, and east side, which have the volatile low angle sun, which can create havocs with our cooling, and then the canopies being a bit more pronounced and helping to sort of reduce some of their heat buildup and just weather protection, obviously, but I think more importantly a bit of what often referred to as a Granville Island sort of quality of detail and refinement, being that quasi-pedestrian industrial use that I think works quite well in that case in Granville Island, and certainly making it a more pedestrian, comfortable space. And I'll just leave you here with a few more 3D elevations, but I think the report kind of covers off a lot of the detail and responses in some of the other aspects. So there we go. How's that?
You still have a few minutes if you want to use it, Brent.
Well, I'm kind of, yeah, no, I wanted to go through some of those elevations, and there's been very little adaptation and change with regards to unit planning, but mostly a lot of work on the site planning, a few other minor points in the underground parking. Sorry, you'll just have to wait for some of the servicing aspects in the underground parking, identification of handicap spots. There was some concern in around the elevator core that the spots were poking into the corridor with. That's been resolved and clarified. A lot of the service aspects, the commercial recycling and residential recycling and garbage has all been separated, brought down to the to the south end of the site rather than the north end, which is where it was before, and to try and address that and just kind of refine and reflect a little bit of the major changes that had been discussed beforehand. So I'll leave the site plan up because it might be the easiest to reference for others to make commentary, etc.
Thanks very much, Brent. Okay, we will do questions now, and I'm going to reverse the order from the last project. So we'll start with Catherine on questions, if you're ready.
Brent, sorry, just to jump in, you've moved the site plan off your main screen that we can see there.
Okay. Let me just, I'll enlarge this as well. How's that?
Thanks for reversing the order. I'm not quite ready. I had to the end. I guess, I don't know if these are comments or questions. Okay, so is there any tree cover or anything in the play structure area to create some shade on that south side?
There is not.
Okay.
Although there are a fair bit of trees around the perimeter, and there's a fairly substantial overhang for a portion. I can see a dashed line above the playground area there, so some of the seating area is under protection.
Got it. Okay. You know what? I'm going to leave it there. I'll probably just have more comments than questions right now.
I can come back to you at the end, Catherine, if you do have another question.
Thank you. Yeah, I wasn't just quite ready.
Okay. Kareem, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Brent, for the update. It's looking good to me. My only question was, and I was the panel member who talked about the sort of the amenity space being on the north face. I can see now that there's a bit that the majority of it has moved to the south, which is great. I was wondering, is there a reason for having some of it still on the north side? Is this just like a client request or a programming request, or like my question is it better to have one big amenity space, or is there a reason that some of it is still up on the north side?
I think we've always felt that it's a big building, so the distribution, and we don't have tenants, unfortunately. So you were kind of foreshadowing a little bit of there may be cafe, restaurant, bistro kind of thing on either end of the building. Certainly, we feel that there's some awkward spaces on the north end of the building with the curve that are better occupied by sort of more fluid landscape type spaces. Versus the other end being more hardscape. Across Pioneer Way is actually a fairly industrial site, so we're not fully on board with having everything at that particular end of the building. And also, there is a fair bit of grading and balance of access and parking, which has been difficult to sort of get right, or at least comfortable for the owner who wants to have the ability, obviously, in most cases, to drive pretty close to the front door of some of these units. So.
Got it. Thank you. No more questions from me.
Julian, next.
Thanks, Brent. Could you just do me a favor and zoom into the north area parking? It looks super tight against the boundary there. I just want to make sure you've got enough space to actually reverse in and out of those handicap spots. I'm assuming you have.
Yep.
You got the 6 meters or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah. Sorry, I'm looking at this on a really small little screen here. And the other question I had was just a bit more detail on your site furnishings. You had a few little illustrations at the bottom of one of your sheets. Just wondered if you could zoom in on those. So what do you got going on there?
2 seconds there. So had to go with bike racks that
Yep.
are sort of identified throughout sort of a pre-established complement of bench and backless bench, and then play structures are, at the end of the day, are really kind of more of a placeholder, I think, at this point, until that gets refined a little bit more. But the intent of having some climber main item at each of those playgrounds. Lighting is either sort of custom made up against the building, which is built into sort of a feature treatment there, and then low bollards along some of the pedestrian pathways. And then the lighting from the canopy is basically tucked up into the canopy itself and lighting back at the building. So we're not getting floppy suspended signs. The signage is actually on the building itself. And Squamish can be a fairly windy place, and these things sort of moving around a little bit is just not ideal.
What's the thing next to the play structure there? On the left of the play structure, what's that?
We've got a standard wood picnic table that we've got out in a few locations. And
no, the one to the right of that, what's that?
Oh, it is another play structure.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. Just
Sorry, I just couldn't work out what it was. I was like, what is that thing?
Sort of a three-dimensional climbing thing with multiple arcs and yeah.
Cool. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Julian. Farzan is next. We do have you here, Farzan.
I cannot hear you.
You
Me?
Yeah.
I couldn't hear you, John.
You're up for questions. Yes.
Okay.
Farzan, I think John is saying it's your turn to
I think he's saying you're up.
I couldn't hear you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Brent. Very nice. Very colorful building. One little question. I see this green panel behind this wall sconce. Is it actually green or bright yellow? Because I like that green. Is it bright yellow?
I believe the intent is that it's yellow. I don't recall us using green on the building in any of the color finishes.
Well, it's behind the wall sconce that you were showing. But that's not a big deal. My main, actually, I was wondering about this roof terrace that you have up there. And it's a wonderful space. I think it's wonderful. But at a very small point, we can have a possibility of actually have access or visual access actually from outside to these terraces. Do you think it's a possibility to have a connection? If you can look at the south east corner, it comes to a point that you could have some access or actually at least a visual aspect to this wonderful space indoor. Do you think that's a possibility?
Oh, I hadn't considered it.
Because it comes to a point.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I would have to review. I'm not sure exactly where you're picking up, but
right at the southeast corner, where it comes
okay.
two walls right at the point.
Okay. Yeah.
Have an access, or you can have at least a visual aspect access to this wonderful space.
Okay.
Anyway, other than that, I think it is interesting project. Thank you very much. No further comment. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Farzan. Carlos, are you ready to go? Questions?
Yep.
Thank you.
Hey, Brent, thank you so much for that presentation. I really appreciate the summary page. That was very clear to understand a lot of the changes you've gone through. The vertical sunshade element, which you've labeled as 20, is that metal or is it meant to be wood?
The coloration on the 3D came across more wood-like than my intent, and the intent is that it's an aluminum extruded section.
Right, and then the kind of the brown elements around some of the windows. That'll be the brown metal sanding seam. Okay, great. And I guess did you in your process of exploration did you look at any other colors besides the yellow and orange?
We actually had something was a lot less muted, and the client felt that with it being, I think the success of the project is kind of being a bit more vibrant, and the commercial as a commercial destination, feeling that was a preference rather than trying to be too sublime and too comfortable of colors. So we moved away from that.
Okay. And for your EV parking stalls, the 30%, is that conduit to stall, or is that including the charging unit?
As far as I know, it's going to be conduit to the stall.
Okay. That's all the questions I've got. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. And now Brent.
Great, thanks, Brent, for the presentation. Yeah, I think my only question would be parking. So still see that there's more parking than required in the bylaw, and just was wondering if any sort of configurations which reduce the amount of parking along Queensway further was considered.
No, I think at the end of the day, the goal was to have a comfortable distribution of handicap loading and I'll call them drive-up stalls to the front door, those commercial units. And with the loss of the, I'll call it the more direct access to the north end of the building, the owner felt a need to show those and still maintain parking so that the north end of the building still was viable as a a drive-up location, and someone wouldn't, so we end up with a third of the building that couldn't be rented. So anyhow.
Okay, yeah, makes sense to me. That's my only question. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Brent. Catherine, would you like us to come back to you for any other question?
I'm good. No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. If we go to comments, would you be ready to comment and start that?
Yeah, I'm ready to comment.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thanks. So a couple things. I like the fact that, and I really like this project. I think it's really interesting, and the issue, like I guess one of the main issues I have is that all pretty much the new buildings that have gone through Queensway have parking in the front, and then the buildings on that east side, on the Queensway side. And so it's more of the same, which is going to mean more concrete and focusing on cars. So in terms of being able to even with the pathway that you've created, which I think is great, it still feels like you're basically driving by a parking lot. And I hear what you're saying around needing to have parking on that east side for people to be able to drive to their entrances. But one thing I'm noticing is that on the south end, where most of the sunshine's going to be there in the summertime, I wonder if you would consider removing some of that parking and create the amenity space down there. Because right now you have landscaping, you've got some grass, there's no place to sit there, and then there's parking, and then there's a playground that's basically a playground surrounded by concrete, and there's some, I see some landscaping as you exit, but it just seems like a real lost opportunity in terms of creating a place where people can gather, a public space. And I'm not certain that the trees that are exterior to the parking are going to actually reach the play structure when it comes to getting shade from them. And also wind, breaking from winds that come every day from the south, the sea breeze. And the Pioneer way road is at this point the least busy road. So that's going to be the nicest place to hang out. Down at the north end, I don't know if you mind, just I'll scroll over here. You know, there's a nice adventure playground there. Again, where you could go and sit and you could have lunch or you could hang out with a friend, but it's right on Queensway, which is the busier spot. So I'm sure there's lots of good reasons to not make the south end more kind of user friendly, but I think if you could consider it, I think it would add a lot to the community and just offer a different way of doing things. Because often what's happening on that street is just exactly what we're mimicking here, which is parking, some landscaping, and then the road. And not a place for people to hang out and sit down. And I realize it's a wider band than other places, but in terms of usable space, green space, it's pretty limited. So I think that's kind of at this point the main issue, because I think the building itself is quite beautiful and I like the fact that you can go through the center, but it doesn't invite me to go there and kind of sit down and hang out with a friend or people to meet outside. The other thing is, I noticed the plant list, again, in terms of pollinator species, I think we could do more. Again, we have lots of Calamagrostis, Carl-Furster. There's other grasses that we could use that would be more interesting. The Echinacea, the black-eyed Susan. Again, we see a lot of those around town. They're not particularly good pollinators, though they're not terrible. It's great to see the Nepeta in there, but there's just other pollinator species that we're trying to introduce in Squamish, and there's a pollinator highway trying to happen in this town, so we can be part of that. I mean, it's not that difficult to introduce some of those plants in terms of expense or, you know, time sourcing them. And then the only other thing that it pops out for me is I love bright colors, you know, like the yellow and the red, but I've seen it done very poorly in this town, in one building in particular in this town. And my concern is, like, it could look like, you know, the Georges Pompidou and it could look really great, or if it's the wrong color, it could look really bad. So I don't know, I don't tend to be conservative with color, but I would, I'd really like to see what those colors are and what the contrasts are, because if it can look really dated, and what we have is a West Coast beautiful place and the architecture looks good. And so if we add these flashes of color that don't last the test of time, that would be a shame. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. And we'll go to Kareem next for comments.
Yes, I appreciate, Brent, all the work that's gone into this. I have no comments really, other than the question I asked earlier about the reason behind dividing the amenity space. I think, you know, obviously this is you've got your reasons, but I still think that, you know, your southern exposure, your views of the chief, all of these things are good reasons to sort of create a big, nice amenity space, and not just a medium one and then a small, probably neglected one to the north. But anyways, other than that, I appreciate all the work that's gone into it, and good luck.
Thanks, Kareem. And Julian next.
Thanks, Brent. I am fully supportive of all the amendments that you've made. I think there's a lot of work that's gone into the project from the last time we saw it. I think it's all heading in the right direction. Interesting that the space now just off Pioneer Way there, it almost feels like you have an opportunity to create a pedestrian orientated plaza effectively, that vehicles are allowed into, but it's really a pedestrian realm. And I wondered, you know, it could just be as simple as changing the paving material in the road surface so that that area is not asphalt, because I think that would definitely enhance the play area there and the pedestrian experience, and I think it would generally you know, it would act as an anchor for the building on that corner. It's, you know, south-facing, it's doing all the right things. So anyway, just a thought. My only other comment was really with regard to, and it's probably a little bit further ahead than where you're at now, with regard to the street furniture, just to make sure, obviously, that it's all fully accessible, the play equipment's fully accessible. I noticed you had a picnic table in there that didn't look particularly accessible. So just, that was it really. But everything else I think was great. I really like the bold approach with the building and the color scheme. I think it looks great.
And we'll go to Farzan now.
Hi, thank you very much again. Very quickly, I also echo, if we can, I think it would be improvement if we can have the playground at the south side, more sunny side, if it is possible. The other comment might be, as Brent mentioned, if we can even reduce some of the landscaping near the entrances, and he said if you don't want to reduce the number of parkings, we can just break this long landscaping in north and south, just one slot to become landscaping and two sections. I think that would really help. Other than that, no other comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Farzan. And we'll go to Carlos.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so Brent, the first one, I really like the yellow. I'm not so sure about the orange, but everyone's got an opinion on colors, so take it only as that. I recommend just for some future proofing and just knowing the requirements that you make accommodations for maybe an additional PMT. I just know from our experience planning for additional EV charging stalls, even with mode sharing and the rest of it, it's usually driving the demand, especially for building the size for additional PMT. So putting that stuff in when you start might be a way cheaper thing to do in the long term, especially if there's going to be for a rental building. So with respect to Catherine's comments and Julian's comments, I'm going to take a bit of a different position here on parking. And it kind of goes back to like what this zone was meant to be. So I think this mixed use development zone initially was really meant to focus on employment lands and that ground plane. And for various reasons, I think we've seen probably a bit of a different built form than we had expected when this mud zone was first presented. But I think the emphasis in this area should still be the employment units and accessibility to those units. And I think that having parking is important. And I imagine that, I don't know how you did the parking equation, but if everyone builds out a mezzanine and if everyone goes to office, I think you'll be stressed for, or office as an accessory use, you'll be stressed for parking on this site. So having more is better. And so I think that should maybe take precedent over additional pedestrian realm. I just don't know that we ever are meant to have the densities in this area to truly consider these businesses as pedestrian primary, unlike other parts in our downtown. And I just, that playground on the north side, I do really appreciate the covered area and the overhang. I think that actually that space will be utilized quite a bit, especially in our rainy months, which seem to be numerous. So I wouldn't be adverse to keeping that playground structure there. And that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thanks, Carlos. And we'll go to Brent next.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Brent. Yeah, want to say really appreciate the changes that were made, and no one's commented on the access coming on the north, or changing of access on the north end, and I think that we've done a really good job of sort of finding a creative solution to provide emergency services access without making that a primary access point. So I think that even just from a intersection safety, pedestrian connectivity perspective, that's a huge win for this project. So commend you on that. And that really is my only comment. I think that I like the bold colors, and I think that the balance between finding something that's future proof but also pushes the boundary is a challenge that I'm glad I'm not tasked with. But yeah, I want to say thank you for the work. So that's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Brent. As for my comments, I have to echo what Carlos has mentioned in that this mud zoning is it's a transition zone, and when you look at Pioneer Way, you've got pure industrial uses on the other side to the south there. So I imagine it's a good idea to have some kind of buffering, and that most of your light and whatnot is going to come from the bottom of the image, which is the west side. And that interface with the next door neighbors is something we spoke of a fair bit in the last review, and I think that's a really important part of it. I think you guys did a good job on that the first time with the walkway that goes through there and whatnot. Yeah, I would suggest that parking is very important as a part of a use of this particular style of development, the mud zoning. And if not as a park, or if even parking and whatnot, I like to think of some of these spaces as flex type areas. So, you know, you've got a playground penciled in on the north end there. If there is a cafe up there and the playground's not getting used, well, then maybe that becomes a seating area for the cafe and a public space that people can use in a different format. So they are useful areas, but of course you've got quite probably a bit of a hill coming off of the road below there, so there's some limitations that way. At any rate, has anyone else got any other comment before we move to the vote here?
I
just wanted. Oh, sorry. Go, Brent.
Okay. One last comment, John. Sort of something I should have caught before, but I think it'd be worth exploring having the accessible parking spaces evenly distributed throughout the site. I think that noting that there's 3 at the north and 3 at the south end doesn't necessarily provide an accessible option for someone who is looking to access one of the businesses on either the east or west side. So something to consider. That's all for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else?
John, I just wanted to make it clear that I wasn't advocating for the elimination of the parking off Pioneer Way there. I think the parking's absolutely fine. It was just the design of the actual parking surface itself. I thought it could maybe be different so that it was a more pedestrian orientated space, but it still allows for vehicles to be parked there.
Understood. That's a good idea. Okay. Aside from going through all of the options again, I'm going to suggest that option B will be the one that we go with, that the advisory design panel supports the project as presented and would like the applicant to work with staff to resolve following recommendations. Any discussion on that, Carlos?
I'll just second that.
Okay, well, I won't move it, but I'm looking for discussion right now, and then if everyone's okay with it, I'll look for someone to move it. Okay.
I'll move it.
William will move it. Second. Carlos, thank you.
Yep.
And anyone against? No one against, so we have passed item B. Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Thanks, John. And just in the future, we should perhaps give people a little bit longer of an opportunity if they want to vote against it. That was a bit of a quick turnaround. And we didn't have everybody's photos up. So yeah, just a little bit of advice for next time. But yeah, I think we're good to go here. Thanks, Brent. So you're welcome to maybe Tori can hand the presenter ball back to me, and Brent Murdoch, feel free to sign off. And
Thank you very much.
Thanks. It looks like my coworker Matt Gunn is joining, so I don't know if we want to just keep pushing forward to the next item, John.
Well, the next item, we can give it 3 minutes if Matt wants to orient himself.
While we're giving Matt an opportunity to get organized here, I can maybe transition us into the project and give a little bit of a brief background here. So most of this is outlined in the staff memo that was attached to the ADP agenda. So myself and Matt Gunn are two planners that have been working on development of some wildfire DPA guidelines to address the fire hazard that exists in our community. And we know that's being exacerbated by climate change, and we have a bunch of policy documents that speak to development of this wildfire DPA. We got some funding from UBCM, and so we are have been working on this project for almost a year now and wanted to bring it to ADP because it's finally getting to more of a finalized state. And we're looking for ADP's feedback on the guidelines. So I'll let Matt jump in here and maybe flush that intro out a little bit more.
Absolutely. Thank you. And sorry there for being a bit late. I was just getting out of another meeting. Yeah, thank you very much for having some time to help us out with this and check in on the development of this development permit area. It was one of the identified goals of our wildfire community protection plan. We, as Asia said, we hired a consultant, Bruce Blackwell, who works on these all over the province, and he's been going through a process with us. We have done some engagement in the community. We ran some workshops where we presented our initial direction, and you know, I think the reason that we're keen to spend some time talking to ADP about this is that there are some fairly significant implications of the guidelines that we need to put into place if we're going to achieve a goal of limiting our vulnerability to adjacent wildfires. It's been really good having the consultant on board. He's been involved in a number of these projects, and also spends time working on understanding what has transpired in other communities where wildfire has been on the periphery or gone through, like in the Okanagan, in Fort McMurray, where they've had real serious events with many homes destroyed. And in those events, they spent a bunch of time looking at the characteristics of homes that burned down and homes that did not, and buildings that did and did not. And they've gotten specific to, like, you know, where are because in a neighborhood, there could be adjacent homes that burn and adjacent homes that don't. And so there's really specific key kind of factors about the landscaping and the type of exterior products used on the building. And so he's bringing that knowledge in, and we're trying to put that into a set of guidelines. But because of kind of the specific nature of what can lead to buildings being destroyed by, you know, predominantly the ember showers. This is the biggest problem, where you've got a forest that's adjacent burning, throwing a ton of embers up, they're floating over and then dropping down onto properties. Those really dense ember showers can cause real problems, especially with you know, the inappropriate materials or landscaping adjacent to buildings. And so we've come up with some really quite prescriptive and restrictive guidelines that will actually have quite an impact on the forming character of development moving into the future. And so that's what we wanted to go over and get your thoughts on it. I think there's already internally, we've had quite a bit of tension trying to sort these out, because we have you know, objectives within the organization to try and improve landscaping and bring more of the forest into the community, but that actually often runs quite counter to the goal of trying to preserve or protect the buildings from burning in these wildfire events. So a couple really quick overview pieces. One, we've taken the whole community and in the mapping that was included in your package, divided the community into our primary areas. These are the areas that have adjacency or integrated forests, and that we have to take a higher level of protection with. And then we've got the built up areas that are, you know, downtown business park areas that have less adjacent forest and are a bit less vulnerable. And so we're going to create two different levels: a reduced set of standards for the secondary areas and a higher set of standards for the primary areas. And another key piece here to talk about is that we're because these changes could be significant, and they're going to require staff time to implement and to manage the process. We're not going to be able to implement all of this right at the beginning. In fact, it's likely that we're like the step code, where we have a progression of increasing requirements. It's likely that this is going to be done in a similar manner, where we have just the easiest and most effective pieces implemented at the start, probably like roofing, having a guideline that limits the type of roofing to one that isn't going to burn up if an ember falls on it. And then over a period of time, given if council puts funding towards staff resources to implement this, then we would work towards having more and more of these guidelines implemented. And so what you're looking at in the document that is in the package is the complete set of guidelines for the primary hazard area. So this is, if everything got implemented, we got resourcing to put the whole package into place. For the areas that were at the most risk, this would be the set of guidelines that would apply. And so we wanted to go through those, and it kind of, I'm going to say worst case scenario in terms of implications of this set of guidelines on form and character development. This is kind of the worst case scenario. As I said, there is a tension, and so we've been trying to massage these and provide as much flexibility in site planning as possible. A lot of the tensions are coming around landscaping and our ability to have good landscaping in especially like townhouse developments. And so there might be some further adjustment to this. Well, it certainly will, and your input will be helpful there. But the landscaping pieces are pretty critical. That is, they're essentially, a lot of these landscaping elements that we currently have are essentially bombs in the yards of all of these buildings, right? The cedar hedging are just like, from the perspective of the consultant, these are like absolute should not be done if we want to prevent burning up when and one other thing I wanted to point out, and I'm sure you guys are probably aware of this, but because we have a really mature forest in some areas, or a dense formerly rainforest adjacent to our community. When we get these prolonged dry spells that haven't historically been the norm in the area, that really dense vegetation in these wet kind of rainforest environments, when it dries out, because there's so much density, it actually becomes particularly hazardous, even to a level that we haven't seen in the past. And because of the density of vegetation in there, you might think, oh, but we're on the coast. It really actually is a heightened issue, because we've taken something that's typically been wet and getting dried out. So that's why some of these things might seem a little full on. So having talked about that, what we'd like to do is do a round where people have an opportunity to provide some feedback on the different guidelines there. There are both landscaping and building material guidelines, and we'll just leave it open for people to comment on either or whatever they see. I'm particularly interested in the comments on the landscaping elements, because those ones are the ones that we've had quite a bit of tension over and challenges putting in place or putting together. So yeah, really keen to hear what people have to say. Asia, do you want to add anything to that? You're muted at the moment.
Classic move. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, just a couple things that I wanted to let ADP know is that we have tried to build in a bit of flexibility to the guidelines, where if a qualified professional with wildfire experience does a report that provides rationale to reduce the guidelines, then we've put that in to the DP area. So kind of some flexibility when the qualified professional provides that rationale. So that's one item I just wanted to draw attention to. And then also, just in case people were wondering, we have aligned the DPA with the riparian and DPA 1 for environmental protection, so that the RAR regulations are trumping any of these DPA guidelines. So this DPA won't be facilitating clearing in riparian areas. So just for people's awareness on that.
And from the perspective of the consultant that's working on this project, he's indicated that in general, those riparian areas don't provide really significant risks. So it's not a massive compromise to the safety of the community to provide that exemption. So who would like to provide some feedback?
Would you like me to go through the list as though we do our normal routine?
I don't know if that's totally necessary, John. I'm happy to have more of a relaxed conversation and people can kind of jump in and have more of a discussion rather than just one person kind of dominating for a period of time.
If our computers will allow it. We could work with a show of hands if somebody wants to start or make a comment. Carlos?
Sure, I'll try not to dominate, Asia. So I want to thank you guys both. I think you shared the initial version of this with some folks in the design development community, and I think you've done a great job at addressing a lot of those comments. So kudos to you for that. I also appreciate the flexibility in allowing QP input. I think that'll be quite good. On the building side, and that's kind of more my world, I think, I see that the language around exterior cladding is changed to should, and so that's appreciated because I think there's some flexibility there. I would just hate that the only built form we see is hardy panel going forward. So the ability to use wood cladding, I think is great. If there's flexibility around there, that's wonderful. And so I appreciate the language that's currently there. My question for you on the landscape side, and I know we've got some sealed landscape folks on the panel that will speak to the more direct stuff, but we've got some greenfield developments that will be developed in the next 10, 15 years. And I know this isn't the way that developers typically go about it, but just speaking for myself, like, we would love to find a way to preserve some of these mature trees in these greenfield neighborhoods, so that it's not just like a complete wipeout when we go to deliver these products, right? If people can build a home on a lot with mature trees in the backyard, I think that's actually a really strong selling feature, and also something that just we should be doing. What can you say around that? Like, already it's already stacked in the developer's corner to say, okay, well, let's just clear cut this whole thing and put in roads and services, and then I can just see this being used as another tool. Like, well, it says in the fire smart DPA guidelines that we got to take all this existing material out, and they just bulldoze it. So is there going to be, can you work in flexibility to look at that mature timber in this?
Okay, I'll provide some response to that, and just to be clear, like, we're looking for your input. I may not have all the answers, and I think this kind of feedback will help us put a lens on to go look at the guidelines that we're crafting. But at this point, what I would say to that is that a lot of the guidelines, if you look at it, there's a set of. I'll just see how I worded that. But the landscaping guidelines are intended to be kind of structured in a way that the first chunk is, like, if you look at the draft landscaping guidelines, there's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. Those are essentially intended to reflect mainly what we're thinking about when somebody's going into a piece of land that doesn't have trees and is building a development and planting, right? It's related to what is being added to the site. And then there's a set of maintenance items that are trying to, over the long haul, ensure that things don't become a problem. When it comes to existing trees, I don't think, and we can go back and look as we've gone back and forth, but I don't think there's anything about removing existing trees. There is some specification about how close trees should be together and to the building, right? So that's really the critical thing. It's all focused on the 10 meters from the building. So depending on how big the property is, anything beyond 10 meters, we're not worried about. And then once you're within the 10 meters, which is going to be a lot of a property for most development situations, then what we get down to is, there's a buffer from the building. I think it's 5 meters. We don't want to see stuff closer than 5 meters. But what we can do is look at how that relates to planting versus existing. One of the things the consultant had said with existing is that if you've got a tree that's a mature tree and you trim it from the ground to I think it's maybe 3 meters or some height, maybe it's 6 meters, I have to go look, but if you trim up a certain number of meters from the ground, then you have a lot less chance of stuff burning along the ground and then going up into the tree. And so that, I think that's maybe a piece where we can clarify to ensure that we're providing some support for maintaining trees, while adding an issue, something around preventing those ladder fuels from allowing ground cover to go up into the tree. And then with respect to multifamily developments, I'm not sure if you're talking multifamily or single family. Actually, do you want to clarify what you're thinking there?
Yeah, so from my perspective, we're looking at the Chikai development. It's both. It's a small, medium lot, single family development and a townhome multifamily development, but it's in an area with mature trees that we want to, and we've got greenways and we've got. So I appreciate the explanation, Matt, because I can start to see in my mind okay, well, we've got 10-meter greenways between some of these buildings, so that can be preserved within there, and then with your building setbacks for backyard, that should start to be sufficient. So that's starting to make a bit more sense. I would happily volunteer that we could look at a section and see what the repercussions would be with if we put buffers around all of these things. So
that would be good. And remember that 10 meters is where we start considering. But I think that the restriction is that we don't want trees with like evergreens, and evergreens are kind of the biggest fear, right? Those are the things that have the most potential. I think it's 5 or 6 meters that we don't want the trunk to be within the distance of the building. So it's more 5 to 6 meter separation from the building for the evergreens, and it's 10 meters where we're starting to look at it. And then one of the big things is clumping. The consultant said, hey, we don't want to see multiple trees together, but individual trees that are 5 to 6 meters away from the building, those should be fairly reasonable. And then we've even made some allowances for townhouses where it's much tighter and there's less opportunity. We've tried to create some situations where there's opportunity to have lone trees along one face of a building as an individual, even within the 5 meter zone. So it's not like get rid of everything. There's certainly going to be opportunities with site design. If you're looking, hey, this is a great tree, there will be opportunities to have them even not even within the 5 meters if you're doing a multifamily development. So I think there's opportunities to keep trees. There's definitely been a lot of effort. And the other thing is, if it's evergreen, clumping with deciduous is certainly something that's supported as well. So it kind of depends on what's on the site. And deciduous doesn't apply to deciduous. Like deciduous trees aren't considered to be a problem. So it depends what's there.
Yeah, I think it's harder to find older,
probably.
older deciduous trees and that weren't planted. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, but those are good things to think about. I can go through and look at it with that mindset of greenfield, make sure that it's clear about how those get treated.
Thank you, John. Matt, we just went through the same wildfire for one of our buildings in West Vancouver, and it's quite a rigorous process. And it's really limiting. It's not really as flexible. And we had trees, mature trees on the site that we had to remove. I didn't know about the trimming. They didn't tell us because we had a consultant that they advised us about this wildfire, and they said they have to remove it. So that was one of my concerns, that all the mature trees on the site within 10 meters needs to be removed, which is really devastating. One question, do we have a map? Because in West Vancouver, there is a map of areas that it has a wildfire concern and the others that they don't. Do we have anything like that, or it's everywhere?
So in the package, if you scroll past the memo, if you have the memo, if you keep scrolling past the memo, then there's There's the Fire Smart landscaping guidelines, which are getting, right now we're working with a consultant to combine that with our wildlife friendly planting, because that'll trim some out of there. And then we keep going past that, the next document where the whole town looks red, that's the wildfire hazard area. But there are some yellow blobs, and the yellow blobs are where we have development and where we're going to have a reduced set of guidelines. But most of the town, we have a lot of forest around, and so there's hazard.
I think with this wildfire regulation, the project that we had in the first with Joe that Jesse presented, with these wooden trellises wouldn't pass this wildfire recommendation. We couldn't get it. Now, it has a lot of implication on the design now, and we didn't change much, but fences, railings, soffits, nothing can be uncombustible material anymore. So, but I couldn't find any way out of it, and this is the way it is. One question, maybe Matt, window frame, vinyl window will pass, or we have to go to non-combustible, for example, aluminum window only?
I'm going to pass the building materials questions to Asia.
Okay, Asia, do you know?
Yeah, Farzan, I'm sorry, I don't know. The way that the guideline is written for windows is that they have to be constructed of non-combustible material or have a 20-minute fire protection rating. So to be honest, I'm not sure whether the vinyl window that you're thinking of would qualify or not.
Vinyl wouldn't pass, and if we cancel all the vinyls, a lot of concern for the insulation and step work would be hard to achieve, even with the thermal broken aluminum windows. So that would be a concern that needs to be addressed.
Great, thanks for elevating that, and I'll chase that down the rabbit hole. It sounds like that's a potential serious issue, so appreciate you raising that.
And just to follow up on your comment, so what I'm hearing again is another question about the opportunity to preserve mature trees. And again, when these were drafted, we were really thinking like, you're doing a new development, you're planting, what are you going to plant? How do we want that planted? Wasn't using that lens of like, there's mature trees, what are we going to do with that? And so what I think we could do is we could put some specific language rather than leaving it so you have to interpret the stuff that's written for the new trees. I think we could put in a guideline or two that is very specific to the preservation of mature trees and in what situations those trees could be preserved and what might need to be done to preserve those. I think that's actually a good catch.
Exactly. Because our consultant said you have to remove it. There is no way of holding it. Your idea of trimming it up to 3 or 6 meters or whatever, that would be a good idea, but our consultant in our project said it needs to be removed, which is the key.
Yeah, can I just, one thing on that? So I already know for sure that if it's an individual tree, there's ladder fuels have been trimmed, and I can't remember if it's 6. We've gone back and forth because there's the question around the trunk and then how far out the trim goes, so which numbers you use. But it's either 5 or 6 meters from the building, the outer surface of the building. That certainly we could have individual trees separated from other evergreens by 6 meters. 5 to 6 meters from a building with ladder fuels removed. That is okay in our guidelines right now. If that is in there, does that provide enough flexibility that might work for what you said, Carlos, for what you said? Okay, yeah, because it's the clumping of trees is really problematic. The individuals where they're spaced out isn't. So I feel like already I'm feeling like this might not be too big a deal from what we've talked about.
Yeah, if the trimming is acceptable, I think that provides a lot of flexibility.
Catherine?
Hi, thanks for this. This is great to have more information about the guidelines. I just have a question around mulching because usually, well, in the past, people have been using a mix of like hemlock and fir mulch, but now landscapers are moving more towards the aged mulch, which is a partially composted material, and seems like it's less flammable, and it's got more organic material in it. So what are your thoughts on that Matt, in terms of the use of that?
Okay, yeah, so that is a good question. I will so first off, with the mulching, how close to the building are we talking about? Are you talking about across the entire area, or?
It's usually, you know, garden beds tend to be, it depends on, you know, if it's a single family home, sometimes they can be, you know, quite close to the building, but it's just, landscapers are generally using something that's got more organic content to it, not as dry, doesn't blow around as much. It's more like it often depends how composted it's been by the time you actually get the material. So sometimes you'll buy the material from the supplier and it's been sitting in a pile. So it's actually mostly, at this point, it's mostly soil with some woody material in it. So as opposed to, say, a compost, which might have been composted for a longer time and there wouldn't be as much woody material. I just think that's a good, I think that's a good option in terms of mulching. And when you've written stuff like using landscape fabric and decorative rock or gravel mulch, I wouldn't necessarily advocate for that. A couple reasons is that things like decorative rock or gravel, not the best thing, say, for trees or plants. And then landscape fabric has this, I mean, there's sort of the landscape fabric is often quite maligned with landscapers because it doesn't let much water get down and penetrate through it. Weeds still come up through it, and also it just doesn't allow for sort of, you know, if you're adding a mender to the beds, it's really hard for it to get through the landscape fabric. So I just wonder, again, I don't have all the answers, but I've seen it out there in areas with decorative.
Catherine, if I could jump in there as well, I think I would get rid of the landscape fabric entirely, to be honest, because I could see developers basically just using landscape fabric as an excuse not to do anything, and you'll end up with sheets of landscape fabric blowing around the town centre. You know, it will be absolutely all over the place because it's cheap and, you know, it's fast to put down. It doesn't require a lot of, you know, doesn't require a lot of manpower to get it down. And you can cover vast areas very quickly, but it will literally just, you know, unless it's pinned down by something else, it will be floating around. You'll be pulling it off lampposts.
Okay. So maybe if I could respond to those comments. So I think what I'm hearing is, and just to be clear, so the memo that we put together has you know, the guidelines we've referenced this other document that the consultant had come up with, which was trying to determine flammable versus non-flammable. And so some of the points you were raising was related to that consultant's memo, or call it the consultant's document. But in our memo, the one piece that I think it's the only part where we specifically talk about mulch is that we can't have mulch within 1.5 meters, and what the consultant had said is, like, there are certain things that if they're right next to the building and the ember shower lands on that, house burns down. So in our guidelines, we're saying no mulch, 1.5 meters. It's not, I don't think it's saying
no mulch, full stop.
Caring for your garden, that section, it's the last.
Yeah. That's his document about flammable versus non-flammable. And actually, the reference to this document, the Fire Smart Landscaping, is more we're trying to talk about which plants we can use and can't, and that's why we're referencing his document. Those aren't actual DPA guidelines in that document. It was just referenced to highlight those recommended versus non-recommended plants. So in our guidelines, the thing we're saying is no mulch in 1.5 meters. I hear you saying, hey, there's other mulchy type products that are more organic-y mulch things. And so I'm going to make that as a question to ask him about organic mulches.
You might want to call it aged or partially composted.
Yeah. Partially. It sounds like the real danger is chip bark mulch, which is it's not that common these days. Sometimes you still see it. You know, it literally is like chipped up Douglas fir bark.
And what's the technical name for it?
they'll call it bark chips. That's sometimes what they'll just call it. It depends on who the supplier is. But I would say that the what they call bright mulch is, I would say it tends to dry out garden beds, and so people are moving away from that. Landscapers are moving away from that and adding something that's darker. It's more partially composted, so it's just it's not as, it doesn't dry out the plants as much, doesn't blow around as much, and it adds some nutrition.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to him about, hey, and the consultant has a landscape architect on staff. They're actually working on some of the plant questions right now, but I will also ask, hey, can we talk about variants of mulch and where variants of mulch would be appropriate within that 10-meter boundary? That makes sense?
Totally. Yep. Totally. Yep.
Kareem, go for it.
I want to ask if, just looking at this quickly, I'm not sure, I'm not aware of the sort of the background work that was done on this, and if sort of industry reps were consulted on this. My worry is the cost implication of this, and how do all these requirements or recommendations, how do they reflect on the price per square foot in Squamish on the long run? I'm looking at one item here. For example, if you're requiring the post and beam of decks to be fire resistant, so I'm thinking a typical sort of Part 9 townhouse development. It's going to be combustible. Yes, there will be sprinklers inside, but typically your deck is not heavy timber or once you require developers to clad it with metal or brick or whatever, they will, but that sort of raises the price of products that are out there on the market. So I'm just thinking out loud, and I'm not by no means an expert on sort of the development side of things, but I'm just I'm wondering if builders, architects were consulted on what would these recommendations do to the future of sort of the urban fabric of Squamish.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that question, and I mean, it's a fantastic question, and I'll be the first to admit, like, we solicited input from kind of we have a bit of a mailing list for developers, so we did attempt to consult with them, and we did get some feedback. Quite a bit of it was focused more on the concerns about the added red tape and just the permit processing aspects, and a lot less on the cost implications. But I think that's a really great point, and perhaps we need to do a bit more consultation on that end. It's tough because, I mean, the ultimate goal is to achieve protection for the community. So, at what cost versus, making these improvements to the building versus losing the entire buildings to a wildfire. It's kind of, it might be a bit easier to rationalize the changes, but yeah, I appreciate you raising the question. And I think this also kind of ties in with the rollout of the development permit. And Matt had mentioned previously in the intro, that we're really hoping to do this as more of like a step code approach. And I think that there was quite a lot of cost implications that were wrapped up in the step code review, and that was part of the impetus for bringing that in a phased manner as well. So that I think kind of ties back to that, and certainly at the staff level, our desires to bring this in a phased manner.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Carlos or Brent, go.
Yeah, I'll go first. I just question about. I think the approach of bringing it in as a phased approach makes a lot of sense, and wondering if it's something that could be additive. So like you look at these different building materials and there's certain elements that have a bigger benefit from fire prevention. And if you have those elements, maybe some of the other areas you can sort of build as per usual, if there's any sort of flexibility foreseen with what it might look like as you progress through those different steps.
Yeah, that's totally our intention. And so, as Matt mentioned, in the recommendation from the consultant is that roofing is the number one, like hands down, the most critical aspect of the building material. So I think our intention is to go hard on the roofing and to phase in the rest of the elements over time and as kind of staff resourcing allows. So yeah.
Okay, so but it wouldn't be this sort of thing that if you say you do roofing and exterior cladding, and that means you don't need to do your overhang projections and your windows, say you can use combustible materials. It, like as you move towards some implementation of the rest of the measures.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're getting at, and so I think our intent is to bring things in phases, but not to have it be kind of a combination of items where it's like LEED certification, where if you check enough boxes, you'll get over the threshold. I don't think that's kind of what we envisioned. It's kind of just bringing on different elements as we're able to resource them.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, it's my one comment was just on the mapping, and so I guess we're looking at the what's the definition that you use for the red part?
Primary versus secondary. And are you wondering about oceanfront?
I'm not, because you
Okay.
guys addressed that, and I really appreciate that. What I am wondering is just if you look at say University Heights, there's a couple like arbitrary areas, for instance, that are secondary versus primary. And so I'm just wondering, like, is it reasonable that when a master plan community, like I'm thinking Garibaldi Springs, for instance, goes in, that you can look at that likely as a secondary wildfire development area, because that build out, it's going to have, set separations. I guess I have a feeling that a lot of these newer developments are going to be able to be viewed differently once they're built. And so your mapping is correct for the state now, but at the time of development permit or at the time of rezoning, it may be something you want to look at kind of preempting that, so that these additional requirements that probably won't be needed are dealt with at the time.
Can I jump in for 1 second? So yeah, I think that evolution over time is super critical to look at. And one thing that we're looking at is trying, if it's a brand new greenfield proposal and there'll be subdivision involved with that, tackling kind of like looking at it from a comprehensive wildfire master planning perspective, where we bang it out at subdivision, and then moving forwards, there isn't that DPA requirement for like any precipitating development kind of coming from that initial one. I think maybe like Ravenswood would be a good example, where at the time of subdivision, you'd hope that most of the requirements were in place. And one approach that is tied to the DPA we're hoping to do is a lot of covenanting, so that the requirements are kind of in place, and the homeowner just, if they're building, they just need to follow the requirements of the covenant. So does that sort of address what you were getting at, or?
I guess, yeah, if you're looking at it holistically at subdivision, and then those areas that are in the interface get a covenant applied to them versus not, I think that's a very rational approach to do that.
Yeah, we've had discussions internally about the challenges of enforcing on covenants, and that's a whole other kettle of fish. But we only have so many opportunities to flex local government tools. So yeah, covenant was definitely one of the options that we were thinking to tie into this DPA process.
Mention something?
John, I think, were you speaking? You were really quiet again, but feel free, anybody, to jump in with further comments and we can keep the discussion going.
I just have a quick question about, I'm glad to see that cedar hedging is becoming something that's off the list because it's not a resilient species for, for all kinds of reasons. But in terms, people are still going to want hedges. And I know that, for example, the consultant has yew is on the list, but there's different species of yew trees. And I'm wondering, it would just be helpful to know what kinds of hedging materials are suggested. I would usually I'd use like a Taxus Medea. So yeah,
Yeah,
it might seem like too granular a question, but definitely
No.
people are going to want hedging, and I wouldn't suggest things like English laurel because that becomes a huge problem. It's also invasive.
Okay, so I will speak to this one. This is one of the cruxes that we're struggling with. From the perspective of the consultant, if we're listening to the consultant, what he's saying is linear coniferous plantings are the worst. Like he's like basically after talking to him and walking around my neighborhood and some of the neighborhoods around here, it's just I see everywhere the very common use of these elements that he says are really, really bad in the event of a fire. And particularly because so many of our areas are very close to big forests, where if it's the late August and it's been dry for a month and that thing's burning and they're showering down embers on those linear structures, what he's saying is that those things catch, they burn all the way along, it generates a lot of heat, and then other stuff starts burning, and you that really is what leads to a lot of homes being destroyed in these areas like Fort McMurray where stuff flows through. It's a major problem, and I know that it's really ingrained in people's expectation to be able to create that privacy with these evergreen hedge structures, but they are, in his mind, a really bad choice. And so it's a real challenge. Right now, the one of the tasks they're doing right now is they're trying to identify a different or additional, because they were like boxwood and laurel. These are things that you can use to create some privacy screening and not have that high risk. And so it's not too granular. This is like the level we're at. We're like trying to be very specific. What can you use to achieve some of these goals that people want to have in their, within 10 meters of their house? And it's a real crux. And I do think that we're going to struggle with it. I think it's going to come down to, like we're probably going to propose what is, the most flexibility we can while trying to maintain the safety that I want. So this consultant has said, hey, I've put DPAs in other communities and I see them not work because they weren't willing to be strong enough in terms of like putting in the restrictions. And so what's getting done is going to continue to propagate or to continue the problem. And I think as staff, we're likely going to recommend something that the consultant says, nope, this will actually limit the problem moving into the future. And so that will probably be more restrictive than some people like. And ultimately it's going to be a political decision. But yeah, it's a real challenge. I don't know that I have a great answer for you in terms of what those plants could be. If you have ideas of the plants that we could use that aren't coniferous evergreens, that could create that privacy structure, let me know. I would really like to know, because I can fire it to the consultant and his landscape architect who are literally working on this question today, right now, trying to grapple with this. So I'm open to ideas, but it's a real problem without a real solution that I have identified at this point.
Yeah, I think that's what it needs, Matt. It almost needs a separate section within the guidelines that is specific for hedging, and it should say this is what you're allowed to use, this is what we don't want you to use, because people are still going to want hedges. There's no doubt about that. We can't get rid of hedges. A hedge. The nice thing about hedges, which everybody knows, is of course that they're not restricted to the same bylaws as fence heights. So if you need something that's 10 feet high, the only way you're going to be able to do that for privacy purposes is a hedge. So we need a definitive list of what that hedge can be. The other problem, of course, is that within the lower mainland, nobody grows these alternate species. So it will change what nurseries will grow as hedging material. Right now, it's pretty much cedar and yew. That's more or less it. And there's not a lot of yew, to be honest, around that's of a decent size. So I think it needs to be put out there, and we need to know what the alternatives are. We need to think about what the alternatives are. We've actually just done a project where this came up in Squamish, where we ended up changing it to Portuguese laurel hedging. But you know, we've got 500 of them on the drawing. I can guarantee you they don't exist in the lower mainland. Somebody's going to have to grow them. So you know, I think it's the sooner we get that information out there, the better, especially for nurseries.
Well, and do you like I'm asking here, do you guys have thoughts of like, hey, have you thought about this as the alternative to an evergreen coniferous for hedging? Is there anything from
I'm
you
sure
guys?
we could come up with a list. I'm sure.
Well, I would love to hear recommendations or questions that I could then fire at the consultant.
Yeah, sure.
If I may, Matt, something that was discussed about exterior sprinkler, that it's not really any standard or any design for it. Wall sprinklers, roof sprinklers, or even outside. If we have a standard sprinkler, it can relieve all these complicated decisions about materials for the buildings and landscaping. It doesn't have a standard design yet, which is acceptable. If we can find a method of the sprinkler, exterior sprinkler, that can relieve all these complicated discussions. It can relieve and gives a lot of flexibility for the design of the building as well as landscape. So I urge you to come up with an acceptable standard for design of exterior sprinkler.
Yeah, and just as a response to that, we although I think that's a great idea to have something a standard that we can point to say, hey, if you meet the standard, then that gives you more leeway. Not having that standard, what we did do is, if you look, there's we tried to create, as I was saying, if you're looking at the landscaping guidelines section L, the last one before it's landscaping maintenance. This is where we're trying to address townhouses where things are more compact and we need a bit more flexibility. And so we've said, despite these other sections, the following relaxations apply in townhouse developments. But in townhouse developments, provided irrigation is installed for all fire-prone trees or shrubs. And so this is the flexibility that we've tried to allow in these tight environments where shrubs can be a little closer and you can have a tree a little closer to the building if there's irrigation installed. It's not allowing total flexibility, but this is what the consultant was like, okay, I can go a little further in that scenario.
No, I'm not talking about irrigation system. Irrigation is zone, it's different. Exterior sprinkler is different, it's for fire. It's not for irrigation.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, that's something that can be designed, and in case of fire, can provide protection for the building as well as landscape. It's not irrigation.
Oh, apologies. The one thing I would say about that, Asia mentioned that to try and create flexibility, one of the options that's always available is that a wildfire consultant could be hired to do an analysis and say, hey, here's the scenario that you can do to get around these guidelines. And in that situation, I would imagine that if they said, hey, we've got a sprinkler system, that they would then be comfortable, or I assume that would provide more flexibility that could allow alternate designs. So maybe that's a place where that would currently be able to be worked in.
Yes, there's no standard acceptable design yet. So if you can set up something that the consultant can follow, it makes it. I went through this and it was really difficult. They don't know what to do. The city authorities don't know what to do. It's maybe premature right now, but there is a possibility of exploring this possibility.
Thanks for the comment, Farzan. Yeah, I will follow up with the consultant too to see if there's a guideline we can add in that might even avoid having to hire a QP, and if there's some kind of just straight up guideline that says if you do this type of exterior sprinkling, then you're covered. So appreciate that. So we're scheduled to wrap up right now. Does anybody have any burning questions, or maybe, yeah, we can do a last kind of call, and otherwise Matt and I are fully available to chat offline through email anytime as well if you want to follow up individually.
I just had a quick one about the green roof section H. I just wonder whether it's worth actually fleshing that out a bit more in terms of extensive and intensive green roofs. They're obviously different things. And I'm wondering whether the inclusion of irrigation, which would be fairly standard on any green roof, would that preclude the comments with regard to the species that could be used or not?
Yeah, from the feedback from the consultant, he green roofs are one of those things that he definitely saw as big risks. And having discussed irrigation across the board, he still was concerned about what was up there on tops of roofs because they are so prone to ember showers, and his thing was, if you get a couple of those going, your local government firefighting team is going to be overwhelmed immediately. And so I think he's setting quite a conservative kind of expectation on what could be done there. I will ask him. I can make another specific question around irrigation and flexibility that could apply, but I know that was definitely a point of concern for a community like ours. Like you said, if you had the convention center, the Vancouver Convention Center in Squamish, and if you had two of those and you had a wildfire nearby, like you're going to be in a lot of trouble really quickly. But maybe the irrigation, I'll ask him again, and more specifically how far we could go with irrigation. But I know that was a real concern.
Yeah, and I think also making that separation between intensive green roofs and extensive green roofs, intensive being more like a garden and extensive more like sedums, the small succulents, so non-accessible. Those two things they're very different creatures. They're designed in a very different way. I just think maybe some clarity around what species can be used in which would be good. I mean, typically extensive are just sedums. There's very little grasses. It's kind of we did a huge one down on the main in Squamish, which is it's the size of a football field. But it's really just it's a carpet of succulents basically. So something like that. I think if we can get some clarity on if that is allowable, what species within that mix are allowable, and then the intensive green roof, which is more like a garden. I think maybe that's where that we need the stricter restrictions in terms of what types of species can be used.
Let me see if I can clarify here. From what you're describing, I think the current the current guideline that's written there is probably more applicable to the extensive. And is it correct in saying that maybe you're asking, is there more flexibility in a situation where there's irrigation and it's a location where people will be able to go to relax, recreate, and can there be some additional flexibility for plant species in that scenario? Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Whether it's one's more like a garden, one's more like a green covering on a roof. The garden is obviously more akin to an amenity space and often designed as such. The main's a good example of it. We have two types of green roof going on. There's an intensive green roof at the back of the building adjacent to the lane, which is basically like a linear garden, and then there's a huge big extensive green roof on the actual roof, which is attenuating stormwater flow and doing all the good things that green roofs do. But they're two very different things. So I think some clarity on how the guidelines apply to those two very different circumstances, that would be helpful.
Great, good comment. Thanks.
Is there a collaboration with SLRD on this topic?
John, I think you mentioned my name, but I can't hear you at all. Can you get closer to the screen?
I'm right up there. Can you hear me now?
Sort of, yes.
It's just so weird how it's doing this. Kind of goes in and out. Well, the question is, I'm just curious if there's collaboration with the SLRD for this.
Over to you, Matt.
No. Interesting idea. Maybe something that we could do to reach out to them and see if they're working on something similar. But to date, it's just been a fully internal process.
I'm just, I was one of the people evacuated about a year ago due to a fire that emanated in the SLRD. So it would be nice if it was an area-wide imperative that was, but I guess somebody has to start it. So kudos to you.
Thanks.
Anyone else for any further questions before we wrap? Okay, can somebody move for termination then? Farzan and Brent to second. Anyone against? There we go. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. You too, John.
Thanks very much, John. Hope you get your audio fixed for the next one.
Work on it.
Thank you.